When I was growing up, I had a childhood friend who lived nearby. We were inseparable, two peas in a pod. We both loved adventure, believed in the paranormal, and enjoyed spending time outdoors, whether it was stargazing or just exploring nature. My friend, she was born in Alaska, and her dad had lived there for a long time. Camping, hiking, fishing, skiing, these were second nature to them. And thanks to her family, I got introduced to those experiences as well, especially camping. It was sometime in the mid to late 90s. We were about 10 or 12 years old. I don't remember the exact age, it's been a while. There was one camping trip I'll never forget. We went to this lake, nestled deep in the forest, surrounded by a meadow. A small stream fed into the lake, coming from a dense wooded area. That day, my friend's dad fished while we played around the meadow and stream. He could keep an eye on us, because the lake wasn't that big, but there was something about that wooded area by the stream. I remember feeling uneasy, like something was off. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't now. It just gave me weird vibes. As the day started to fade into the early evening, it was time to head out and find a camping spot. My friend's dad packed up his gear, and we began our trek back to the truck along a winding path through the woods. Once in the truck, we drove deeper into the forest. The road was steep and rough, and I honestly thought his old Toyota pickup wouldn't make it. It was a basic truck, no frills, and I wasn't even sure it had four-wheel drive. But her dad, being the experienced Alaskan outdoorsman he was, seemed confident and I trusted him. Finally, we reached the top. The area was flat, open, and surrounded by forest on one side. We set up camp, pitched our tents, and my friend and I decided to explore a bit. We hadn't gone far, maybe 50 yards, when we heard a loud crack, the sound of a branch snapping behind us. We stopped, looked around, but didn't see anything. We figured it was probably just a deer, so we brushed it off and kept going. But then we heard it again, another crack. We whispered to each other, wondering what it could be, but we kept moving. When we got about 200 yards from camp, we sat on a boulder overlooking the steep wooded hill. From there, we could see the dirt road we'd driven up earlier. That's when we heard it again, another cracking sound from behind. It was like something was following us, moving through the woods. Our imaginations ran wild. We joked about everything from a serial killer stalking us to Bigfoot. When we got back to camp, we told my friend's dad what we'd heard. He played it off, saying it was probably a black bear, and made sure all the food was secured. Later, my friend told me in a hushed voice that her dad had taken out his pistol and would be sleeping with it that night. We shared a tent. While her dad was in his own tent, not far from us, I felt safe enough, knowing he was nearby. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of something or someone walking outside the tent. I froze, listening carefully. Whatever it was moving quietly, circling the tent, and it was on two legs. I could hear the steady rhythm of its steps, and it sounded big. I could almost feel the weight of it as it moved, each footfall heavy on the ground. At times, I could even hear deep, quiet breathing, like it was close enough that I could sense its presence. It wandered around the campsite, making this slow, repetitive loop, back and forth. I lay there, terrified, unable to wake my friend. I listened to it circle the tent over and over until somehow I drifted off to sleep. In the morning, I told my friend and her dad about what I'd heard. I'm not sure if they believed me. Nothing in the camp was disturbed. No footprints, no signs of anything unusual. The ground was too hard or covered in grass in most places, so there was no evidence left behind. To this day, I still think about that night. I've never been able to explain it, but every time I go camping, I can't help but wonder what it was that walked around our tent all night long. I found out monsters are real after going to a party with my best friend Maggie. It all started with a bit of harmless fun, or so I thought. Come on, he'll never find out. I pestered Maggie, hoping to convince her to sneak out to a party with me. In hindsight, I wish I hadn't pushed her so hard. I could tell she was close to giving in, hugging one of her oversized plush sheep, like she always did when she was deep in thought. He always finds out, she reminded me, her voice carrying that familiar hint of unease. I swear he knows everything. Maggie and I had been best friends for 5 years, but it felt like we'd known each other forever. She was raised by her dad, a quiet and stern man, who took care of her without any help, as much as I respected the way he provided. For her, there was something about him that always creeped me out. He wasn't the type to say much, but the way he looked at people, at me, Felt like he could see right through us, like he knew things other people shouldn't. Even if he does find out, what's he gonna do? Take away your phone? Ground you? I shrugged, trying to downplay her concerns. I think it's worth it. Maggie looked younger than she was. Most people thought she was just starting high school when, in reality, we were both about to graduate. She was smart, a real bookworm, but she never got into the typical high school stuff like parties or dating. And now, with school almost over, she was starting to regret it. There was a huge year-end party happening at an abandoned farm nearby, something of a tradition among the seniors. And Maggie wanted to go. The cops knew about it, but didn't interfere as long as nobody got hurt, and the bonfire stayed under control. I don't know. Maggie hesitated, but I was done listening to her excuses. I'll pick you up at 8, I told her. We'll tell your dad you're staying at my place. My parents are working nights, so they won't even notice I'm gone. Maggie finally relented, and I couldn't help but celebrate. I asked her for the last can of cream soda, which meant heading downstairs to the kitchen. I could hear the faint sound of a table, saw coming from the garage, where her dad was working. I grabbed the soda and started back upstairs, but just as I reached the halfway point, the saw stopped and I froze. Maggie's dad was suddenly standing at the bottom of the stairs, covered in sawdust. I hadn't heard him come inside, and it unnerved me how quickly he had appeared. He built custom furniture that sold well among certain circles, though I never quite understood why the pieces all seemed so plain to me. Anne, he said, using my full name instead of the nickname everyone else called me by. His voice was calm but carried an edge that always unsettled me. What were you two discussing? My heart skipped a beat. How could he possibly know we were planning to sneak out? Oh, girl stuff, I stammered, trying to keep my cool. He stared at me, those cold, icy eyes locking onto mine. I do know, he said, and for a second, I thought I might pass out. Prom is coming up. Let me know your plans when you've made them. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. He was just talking about prom. Okay, I replied, nodding slowly. He started to walk away, but before he left, he added, if you ever find yourself in trouble, ask for my help. I wasn't sure what to make of that, but I nodded again and watched him disappear down the hallway. The rest of the night went by uneventfully. Maggie and I talked about the party, our final assignments, and even prom. She had rejected a few guys from her anime club who had asked her out, and since then the group had been giving her a hard time. I told her we didn't need to go to prom, that we could just hang out together, but I knew she wanted to go. She wanted to wear a nice dress, have a cute flower arrangement, and show off her date, even if she didn't have one yet. I had considered asking her myself. Maggie knew I liked both girls and guys, but I never got the feeling she saw me that way, so I kept my feelings to myself, content with staying in the friend zone. When the night of the party came, everything went according to plan. Maggie dressed in her usual way, a heavy, gray sweater and plain jeans, while I went for something a little flashier. I wore a hot pink top, a leather jacket I'd found at a thrift store, and ripped jeans that looked more expensive than they were. I hadn't thought about how my outfit might raise suspicion. As we were leaving, her dad suddenly appeared at the door. His arms were crossed, and we both froze, convinced we were busted. Are you girls going somewhere tonight? He asked, his voice calm but commanding. I tried to play it cool. We're just going to the movies, I lied, and then we're gonna study. I'm going to fatten her up with overpriced popcorn. He looked at me for a long moment before reaching into his wallet and pulling out some cash. Movies are expensive, he said, handing me the money. Then, without missing a beat, he asked, Any drinking tonight? Maggie gasped, pretending to be offended, while I shook my head, feeling a little guilty for taking his money. Call me if you need anything, he said as we walked away. We promised we would, and once we were out of sight, we relaxed, ready for the night ahead. Little did we know, things were about to take a dark and terrifying turn. I think we're in the clear, I said after a few minutes had passed. Maggie's phone hadn't rung, and her dad hadn't demanded that we turn around. Still, she looked uneasy, and her expression made me slow the car down. I almost pulled over, seeing how uncomfortable she seemed. I feel a little guilty, Maggie admitted. No matter what I thought of her dad, I knew he'd done everything he could to raise her on his own without ever complaining. Maggie wasn't a good person out of obligation. She just had a kind, gentle soul, and that's what made her feel bad about lying. We can turn back. If you want, I offered. hoping to ease her conscience. No, she decided, shaking her head. We'll go for an hour or so, get bored, and then actually go to the movies. I nodded in agreement. Honestly, I bet we'd get bored even faster. Neither of us planned to drink. I was driving, and Maggie wasn't the type to get blackout drunk. The party was just an excuse to chat with. Friends, nothing more. We arrived after sunset, the party already in full swing. Someone had hooked up speakers blasting awful dance music. That was little more than a constant beat. A massive bonfire was burning and students danced around it. Drinks in hand, I recognized a few older siblings of students and some people who had already graduated but weren't quite ready to let go of their high school days. As soon as we arrived, a few friends ambushed me. I made sure to keep Maggie in my line of sight, but she'd quickly found someone from her anime club to talk to. I saw her take a red plastic cup from them, accepting it politely. The crowd grew thicker, and after a while, I could only catch glimpses of Maggie every few minutes. I hate myself now for getting distracted. 10 minutes must have passed before I realized I hadn't checked on her, a bad feeling settling deep in my gut. It wasn't like me to be so overprotective, but something felt wrong. I pulled out my phone to text her. No response. My friend noticed my worry and asked what was up. I told him I was looking for Maggie, but he hadn't seen her either. I tried calling, but the call dropped. After 2 rings, weird, I called again, but this time it didn't even connect. Maggie wouldn't turn off her phone. Panic rising, I excused myself and started weaving through the crowd, calling out her name. The fear clawing at my throat made it hard to stay calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad had happened. I asked a few familiar faces if they had seen her. Most shook their heads, but one person pointed toward the parking lot near the woods. Without wasting any time, I sprinted in that direction, calling Maggie's name. I didn't know why, but I just knew something was wrong. I ran between the parked cars, my heart racing as I neared my truck. That's when I saw them, a group of figures, slipping into the woods, dragging someone behind them. My heart sank. It was Maggie. Without thinking, I ran after them, my phone in my hand. I should have called the police first, but panic and anger clouded my judgment. I was determined to stop them. Suddenly, pain exploded across my face. Someone had punched me hard. I cried out, falling to the ground, stars dancing in my vision. The guy who hit me grabbed for my arm, but I lashed out, kicking him squarely between the legs. Blood dripped from my nose as I tried to regain my bearings, but it was too late. A powerful arm wrapped around my neck from behind, and no matter how hard I kicked and screamed, I couldn't break free. The guy was twice my size, and he held me with ease. "Stop screaming, or I'll take it out on your friend," a cold voice said. I stopped struggling, my mind racing as I processed what was happening. There were 3 of them. The guy holding me, the one on the ground groaning in pain from my kick, and the guy with the knife standing calmly nearby. He looked at me, his eyes emotionless, the blade glinting in the moonlight. Maggie lay unconscious on the ground. They must have drugged her drink. I recognized the guy I had kicked. He was from Maggie's anime club. The one with the knife was older, someone who had been kicked out of school a few years ago. I didn't know why, but something about him terrified me more than the others. The 3rd guy was huge, probably from the football team. "If you touch her, I'll rip off your fucking face," I hissed, rage momentarily overtaking my fear. The guy with the knife smirked. "Oh, that's a fun idea," he said, taking a few steps toward me. His voice was eerily calm, his dark eyes giving nothing away. He held the knife up, letting the moonlight catch the blade. "I was going to see how many cuts it would take to kill her," he said, "and then hand her over to these, 2. But maybe I'll take your suggestion and peel off her face instead." My blood ran cold. I kicked out, trying to knock the knife from his hand, but he stepped back, dodging easily. The guy holding me tightened his grip, and I felt my vision blur as I struggled to breathe. Just when I thought I would pass out, he loosened his hold, but kept a firm grip on my arm. "You're joking, right?" The guy I'd kicked spoke up, his voice shaking. "I just wanted to have a good time, not kill anyone." For a moment, I hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd let us go. But as the guy with the knife stared at me, I realized the worst was far from over. His leader didn't flinch as he stared at his lackey. In one swift motion, the knife came down, slicing off a piece of the man's ear. He stood frozen, blood streaming down his face before he began to scream. His hands flew up to the wound, instantly soaked in blood. Even the football player, as big as he was, looked as terrified as I felt. He might have been bigger, but it was clear he didn't think he could stand up to the psycho in front of us. The knife was raised again, this time in my direction. The ringleader's dead eyes locked onto mine. "I'll let you choose. What's coming off first, your nose or an ear?" His voice was steady, hand unmoving. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck. I could live without an ear, right? Maybe they could stitch it back on. My eyes flickered to the ground, where my phone lay, out of reach. I cursed myself for not calling. "The cops when I had the chance." "Ear," I finally whispered, my voice barely audible. He nodded, but then, to my horror, turned toward Maggie. The moment he moved, I snapped back into action, thrashing wildly against the football player's grip. I screamed, kicked, scratched, anything to get free and stop him. But the guy holding me was too strong. Panic coursed through me as time seemed to slow. I had to do something, anything. I screamed as loudly as I could, the sound tearing through my throat. "Help! Please, somebody help!" The scream was so piercing, it made even the knife-wielding psycho pause and glance back toward the party. But no one there had heard me. Someone else had. Heavy footsteps approached. A figure emerged from the darkness, stopping just 5 feet away. My heart nearly stopped when I saw who it was. "Mr. Walker?" My voice was weak with disbelief. Maggie's father stood there, his icy eyes scanning the scene. They landed on his daughter, unconscious on the ground. His face remained disturbingly calm. "Did they do anything to her?" he asked, his voice steady but chilling. I shook my head, grateful I had made it. In time. He gave a single nod, then locked eyes with the ringleader. The tension in the air thickened, and suddenly I realized I was more terrified of Mr. Walker than of the 3 men who had just attacked us. The ringleader raised his hands defensively. "She's fine. We didn't hurt her. How about you take her and we forget this ever happened? I don't want any trouble." His voice wavered, the facade of control slipping. Without a word, Mr. Walker made a small motion with his head. The bleeding lackey was suddenly hurled into the forest as if thrown by an invisible force. It happened so fast, I didn't even register the movement. The ringleader's eyes widened in confusion, searching for his fallen companion. But there was no time to process what had just happened. The football player yelped in terror as he was lifted off the ground, suspended in the air by some unseen power. His screams turned into choked gurgles before being silenced by a series of loud cracks, echoing through the trees. Blood rained down from the canopy, drenching the ringleader in a torrent of gore. He stumbled back, all composure lost. Panic took over as he tripped over his feet, sobbing and begging for his life. Mr. Walker took a single step forward, and with it, the ringleader's left leg twisted. Unnaturally, like a rag being wrung out, his scream pierced the night air, followed by the sickening sound of bones breaking. Another step from Mr. Walker, and the ringleader's right arm shattered, hanging limply at his side. Then in an instant, his body crumbled, leaving nothing but a gory mess of flesh and bone on the forest floor. I screamed as blood and tissue splattered the ground. The gruesome sight paralyzed me, yet I couldn't look away. The ringleader, barely alive, dragged himself across the forest floor, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. Tears mixed with the blood on his face as he looked up at the man standing over him, broken and defeated. "What are you?" he whimpered, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Walker didn't answer. He simply turned his head slightly in my direction. "And take Maggie home," he said, his voice calm, but filled with authority. He never looked at me. I'm not sure what would have happened if he had. Numbly, I hoisted Maggie onto my back, her small frame surprisingly easy to carry. In my adrenaline-fueled state, I didn't stop to see what became of the ringleader. I couldn't. My mind couldn't take any more. By the time I loaded Maggie into the truck, my entire body ached. I was drenched in sweat, my hands trembling. I sped away from that party, from that forest, faster than I ever had in my life. When I finally got Maggie home, I should have left. I should have never gone back to that house after what I witnessed. But I couldn't leave her like that, not in such a vulnerable state. I tucked her into bed, making sure she was lying on her side, just in case. Whatever they had given her, I didn't know how much, but I wasn't taking any chances. As I sat there watching over her, the reality of the night sank in. I stared around her room, noticing for the first time how much we had influenced each other over the years. The books, the DVDs, the little trinkets from shared experiences, we had grown together, and now, no matter what, I couldn't lose my best friend, not even after the horror we had just survived. But as I sat there in the silence of Maggie's room, I couldn't shake one haunting question. What was her father really? Near dawn, I heard the front door creak open. My body tensed as footsteps made their way. Up the stairs, my heart pounded as the door to Maggie's room cracked open, revealing a set of cold, familiar eyes. "Wash your face," Mr. Walker said, his voice flat. Before closing the door again, I looked down at my hands, realizing I had rubbed the blood from my skin but hadn't properly cleaned it off. I waited until I heard his footsteps recede down the hallway before heading to the bathroom. My phone, which I thought I had lost, was sitting on the sink. Was Mr. Walker angry with me? After all, I had been the one to take Maggie to that party. If he could do that to those men without raising a hand, what could he do to me? Maybe he was just making sure Maggie was safe before dealing with me. I wasn't going to stick around to find out. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept downstairs and headed for the door. My body was tense with anticipation, every step bringing me closer to freedom. But just as I reached the porch, his voice stopped me cold. "Anne." I froze mid-step, my blood turning to ice. Slowly, I turned to face him, my throat tightening. "Are you mad at us?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I'm angry," he replied, his tone even, "but not at you. Maggie isn't going to be a child forever. She'll want new experiences, both good and bad. I'm angry because I can't always be there to protect her, but tonight I'm glad she had you." A wave of relief washed over me, and I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I was holding. Tears welled up in my eyes, which I quickly wiped away. I had been the one who pressured Maggie into going to that party, and I had taken my eyes off her when she needed me. I knew things could have gone horribly wrong, but what were the chances we'd run into a deranged lunatic and his followers? Are the cops going to ask questions? I stammered, my thoughts spinning. There had been so much blood. 3 young men were missing, and at least one of them must have had family who would notice. Mr. Walker's expression didn't change. No one saw you with them that night, and the remains will look like an animal attack. Tragic but believable. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to ask the question that had been swirling in my mind since the night before. What was this man? But I was terrified of the answer. Is Maggie like you? I hesitated, struggling to form the words. You two look alike, but she doesn't seem... He crossed his arms, contemplating my question. This was the longest conversation we had ever had. I might have been the first person to see his true nature and live to tell about it. "It's complicated," he began, seeming to decide I was worthy of the truth. "Years ago, I found this house in ruins. Squatters had taken over. I was looking for a meal and found one. The woman was already dead from an overdose. I don't know if she was Maggie's mother. Her father tried to sell her to me for his next fix. I devoured him and took his appearance. I had planned to eat the child as well, but she was so small. I stood there stunned. I hadn't known what to expect, but this, I didn't know how to feel about what he had just revealed. I had only moved to the neighborhood a few years ago, so I had no idea what kind of place it had been when Maggie was younger. Still, despite the horror of it all, Mr. Walker had raised a healthy, well-rounded girl into a perfect, if naive, teenager. I think it's good you found her, I said after a long pause. For the first time, he shifted uncomfortably, showing a glimpse of emotion. Killing someone is more than just taking their life, he said quietly. You're stealing every possibility they had. I didn't just take his life and appearance, I stole the chance for him to turn things around. I've wondered if Maggie would have been better off being raised by a human. Despite his faults, I never thought I'd hear Mr. Walker second-guess himself. But after everything, I realized I'd rather have a monster like him protecting my best friend than a man who would have thrown her life away for a high. Yeah, screw that. You're her dad, period. I don't care about the morals. You're the best person for the job, I said, my voice stronger now. Unless anyone who dumps her is gonna have an animal attack too? He raised an eyebrow, almost amused by my bluntness. I've worried about what I might do. As she gets older, he admitted, I know I can't protect her from everything, and it would harm her if I did. She needs to face hardships, just like anyone else. But what if someone really hurt her? What would I do then? He paused, as if weighing his own thoughts. Last night was a special case. I can be there for her through breakups, rejection, but if someone truly harmed her, He didn't finish the thought, but I didn't need him to. I already knew the answer. I've also wondered if raising her would change how I see humans. He continued, if I could see them as more than just food. But it seems I'll always care more about my child than anyone else's. His words hung in the air, heavy and chilling. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about Mr. Walker. His love for Maggie was real, even if everything else about him was monstrous. And I hoped for her sake that love would always be enough to protect her. Yeah, Mr. Walker was terrifying. No question about that. I would never accidentally hurt Maggie, but now I really couldn't do anything to upset her. He seemed to like me enough, but the risk wasn't worth taking. I'm aware this is a large request. I would like you to support her over the next few days. She will be confused about what happened when she wakes up. I do not want her to think I am upset with her, and therefore I cannot admit I know about the outing. For a big scary monster, he sure was a softie. When it came to Maggie, "You're going to make me do all the work?" I half joked. "Yes," he admitted, completely shameless. "Since you saved both of us, I guess I'll stick around. I care about her more than I'm scared of you," I said, shrugging. It wasn't until the words were out of my mouth that I realized what I had just implied. My face turned red, and I quickly reassured myself that girls talked like that about their best friends all the time. It didn't mean anything. I thought I was safe when he turned to go back inside. But then he stopped. That reminds me of why I came out here in the first place. "When are you two going to commit to prom? I would like to buy Maggie a dress soon." I had never been so mortified in my life. I would have rather he killed me than brought up the fact that I hadn't been brave enough to ask his daughter out yet. "We're not," I sputtered. "She doesn't see me that way. I love you both no matter how dense you are. Ask her out before I tell her for you," he threatened. "You wouldn't dare." I gasped in horror. Yes, I would. After all, I am a monster. With that, he shut the door, leaving me with an embarrassing task that I thought might kill me. But somehow I found the courage. After Maggie recovered from the shock of that night, I finally confessed. She didn't know everything about her father, but I could tell she had some idea that he wasn't like other dads. Still, I think she'd accept him no matter what, just like I had. For now, we're keeping it that way, waiting for the right moment, or until he's ready to tell her the truth himself. Mr. Walker is a monster. No doubt he killed 3 people and made it look like an animal attack, and no one even questioned it. I don't know what he really looks like beneath his human disguise, but I think I can handle a future monster, father-in-law. After all, he did push me to ask out the person I care about the most. Now it's just a matter of returning the favor someday.